"We just want a quiet Thanksgiving with the family. Don't come." That's what my son said. Calm, measured, like he was canceling a magazine subscription. My hand gripped the receiver just a second longer, listening to the static. The line was already dead. The silence in my kitchen felt louder than the wind outside. The clock ticked. Tick, tick. It echoed against the yellowing walls, bouncing between the chipped cabinets and the cold linoleum floor that I once scrubbed every Sunday morning. My hands had kneaded dough here. My husband, Roger, once danced me across these tiles with jazz on the radio. My sons used to run in with muddy shoes, turkey steam rising behind them. I stared at the landline, not a single text. Just that one call. 17 seconds I had bought that lake house. Roger and I worked 29 years to pay it off. We rebuilt it beam by beam after the tornado in '87. We planted lilacs beside the deck and chose every rock that lined the path to the porch. And now they wanted me to stay away from it. On Thanksgiving, we just want a quiet Thanksgiving. I chuckled. It sounded like a line from a movie where the mother-in-law is too clingy, too loud, too much. But I had barely said a word in months. I had missed 2 birthdays. I mailed cards. I sent cookies, though they were probably tossed. I didn't complain when Marla took my chair at the table or when Lucas moved the family photos into the hallway. I just stayed quiet. Now, silence had become permission. The room felt cold. I reached for my shawl. It was the same one I wore the last time I saw Ethan, my grandson. He hugged me and whispered, "I love you, Grandma." I still felt his tiny arms. I walked to the window. The trees were bare. The lake out back was still. No ducks. No boats. Just that bitter gray that comes before the first snow. I leaned my forehead against the glass. This house creaked with memory. Every drawer, every groan of the floorboard, held years of life, and now it would echo with someone else's voice. With Marla's sharp laugh, with the sound of my absence. I turned back and looked at the table. The good china was still in the hutch. My fingers moved slowly, pulling out one plate. Then another. I laid them out. 3 places. One for Roger. One for me. One for whoever I used to be when this house was full. The smell of nutmeg lingered faintly in the curtains. The ghost of last year's pie. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old oak chest in the hallway. Inside, beneath yellowed recipe cards and Roger's Vietnam medals, was the original deed. Still in my name. They had forgotten, or maybe they had hoped I had. But I hadn't. I traced the signature with a trembling finger. Lorraine Hale, owner. I set it on the table. I didn't know what I would do yet. But something inside me had shifted. Something small? Not rage. Not revenge. Resolve. I walked to the kitchen and brewed tea. Cinnamon, Roger's favorite. As the steam rose, I sat by the window and whispered, "Quiet Thanksgiving, huh? We'll see." The year Roger passed, I didn't know how to carve a turkey. I had always set the table, not sharpened the knives. Roger did that every year without fail. He'd hum some Miles Davis tune while slicing, left-handed, proud, slow. The drumsticks were always for the boys. I just scooped the mashed potatoes and kissed scraped knees. But in 2006, the turkey came out dry. And I carved it wrong. Lucas said nothing. He was 23 then. Newly married to Marla, who came late and left early. They sat across from me that year. The house felt too wide, the air too clean. Like grief had vacuumed the flavor from everything. Still, I tried. I lit Roger's favorite cinnamon candle and placed it near his seat. I printed the place cards by hand. I baked the same pecan pie from his recipe card, even though it burned slightly at the edges. Ethan was just a toddler, wobbling in footy pajamas, stuffing into his cheeks like a chipmunk. He called me MAGA? Back then, couldn't say Grandma. He was the only thing that pulled breath back into that house. After dinner, I washed dishes with both hands in the soapy water, but I kept glancing at Roger's chair. It sat pushed in, untouched. His reading glasses were still on the mantel. His boots still by the door. My body kept waiting for the sound of them walking toward me. But the only thing that came was the sound of Marla saying, "Next year, we'll probably do something smaller." "Just us," she said it casually, like flipping a light switch. I dried my hands slowly, nodded like I didn't hear. That night, after they left, I took out the quilt Roger loved, the one with navy stars, and curled up in his chair. I watched the lake darken through the frosted window, watched my own reflection blur into the cold. And I whispered, "We made it, Rog. One more year." I did it, because that's what it felt like, surviving. The years that followed were quieter. No one wanted the lake house for holidays anymore. Too far, too old, too much work. I stopped making pies. I started sending gift cards. I became a side dish in my own life, but I never stopped setting one extra plate, just in case someone remembered, in case they turned down the music and heard the silence, in case Ethan asked where Maga went. That Thanksgiving, in 2006, I didn't cry until the next morning. I stood at the sink, peeling sweet potatoes I didn't need, and the tears came like warm syrup down my face. I wasn't crying because I missed Roger. I was crying because no one else seemed to. The photo albums stayed in the cupboard. His tools rusted quietly in the shed. The rocking chair squeaked less often. No one asked to hear his stories, not even Lucas, especially not Marla. And maybe that was the first betrayal. Not the call, not the cold exclusion, but the slow, aching forget. Year after year, Roger disappeared one memory at a time, and I let them take him. I let the traditions slip. I let silence fill the corners. But this year, the silence had a shape. It sounded like a phone call. It sounded like my son saying, "Don't come." I didn't plan to call again. After that first phone call, after the stillness settled into my bones, I had promised myself I wouldn't beg. But the next morning, something pulled me. Maybe it was the sound of the wind through the pine trees. Maybe it was the smell of burnt crust from the store, bought pie I reheated out of habit. Or maybe I just wanted to hear Ethan's voice. I dialed Lucas's number. 3 rings, then a click. Hello. It was Marla. Not a greeting, not a question, just the word. Cold, clipped and sharp. "Hi, Marla. It's Lorraine. I was wondering if Ethan might want to say hi." There was a pause. Not static, not noise. Just silence shaped like judgment. Then she said, "He's busy right now? We're trying to keep things peaceful." "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "I just thought—" "Lorraine?" she interrupted. "I think you mean well. But this constant need for attention, it's a bit much." My lips parted slightly, but no words came. "Lucas doesn't say anything because he's trying to be nice," she continued, her tone as smooth as the knives she probably used to carve my turkey in my kitchen. "But it's exhausting. The guilt trips, the emotional checking in. Honestly, it's a little manipulative." I blinked. Manipulative. That word clung to the air like smoke. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. She sliced with civility, that Midwestern passive aggression sharpened to surgical precision. "I see," I said. "We need space, Lorraine. Maybe take some time to reflect on how your behavior affects others. We want a quiet life." And then she hung up. The line went dead again. This time, I didn't hold the phone. I set it down gently. My fingers trembled, but not from age. I stared out the window. A squirrel skittered across the porch railing, leaves scattered in spirals. I breathed in. I breathed out. Manipulative I, who never knocked on their door uninvited. I, who sent gift cards instead of visiting. I, who made excuses for their forgetfulness. I, who buried my husband and kept the family stitched together with pie crusts and quiet. Now I was manipulative. The kettle whistled. I let it scream. I didn't want tea. Instead, I walked to the old laptop Roger had bought before he passed. It took 3 minutes to boot, another 2 for the internet to load. I opened Facebook, mostly out of habit, and there it was. Marla's post. "So grateful for a peaceful Thanksgiving in our favorite place." A photo. My dining room. The table set with the good china. The lilac centerpiece I made 3 springs ago. The oil painting of the lake I had bought for $14 from a roadside artist and hung above the fireplace. They hadn't changed a thing. Just removed me. I clicked the video below it. A live stream. Lucas carving the turkey, laughing. Ethan chasing their new dog under the table. Marla in my apron. Someone said, "To family." They all raised glasses. I didn't even know they had crystal. My screen reflected my face. Sagging pale. Eyes wide with something between fury and emptiness. I watched the video until my battery gave out. The screen faded to black, but the echo stayed. To family, and then I saw it. In the background of the frame. My wedding portrait. still hanging, tilted slightly. They hadn't taken it down. They hadn't erased me. They had simply decided I didn't belong anymore. Not dead, just unnecessary. I rose slowly, knees stiff, and walked to the kitchen drawer. Third one down. There was a stack of envelopes. Receipts, a key, the key to the safe in the guest room closet. My hands didn't shake this time. I walked down the hallway, the floor creaking beneath me. The guest room smelled like lavender and thyme. I opened the closet, moved the spare linens, reached behind the board panel. The safe clicked open. Inside the deed, original, filed 1993. My name, Roger's name, no one else. They hadn't checked. Or they had assumed. And now they were live streaming from my living room. The deed sat on the table. I stared at the curling edges, the faded ink, the familiar stroke of Roger's name, mine beneath it together, side by side, like always. Then I laid the paper they filed last spring beside it. Lucas's name, and beneath his, another Lorraine Hale. But it wasn't mine. I knew my handwriting. I knew the way my L looped like a ribbon, the way my H tilted slightly right. This signature was tight, careful, forced. Whoever signed it had studied my name, practiced it, but couldn't fake the weight. They had forged me. And not well. I pulled out the magnifier Roger had used to read maps back in his Army Corps days. I tilted the two papers in the light. My original signature shimmered slightly, blue gel pen from the CVS off Lincoln Avenue. The new one, flat black, printed, not even pen-pressed. I checked the filing stamp. May 12, 2022. I remembered that day. I had a cold. I never left the house. No notary ever came. They did it without me. The form was a partial transfer of rights, clever, quiet. Slipped under some city clerk's nose. I wouldn't lose full ownership, but I wouldn't have full control either. If I died, Lucas could claim it all. Marla always played the long game. My chest tightened. Not panic, something colder. Disgust. They were eating pie in my house, sipping cider, telling stories about childhood while erasing the woman who built the walls around them. I reached back into the safe. Behind the deed was a faded blue envelope, thicker than the others. My name written in Roger's hand. I had forgotten it was there. Lorraine, only if you're alone. I peeled it open slowly. Inside, 3 pages of his small, neat handwriting. Lorraine, if you're reading this, I'm not there. And if I'm not there, I need to say this clearly, protect the house. They'll smile, they'll nod, they'll say the right things. But when time stretches long and people forget their roots, they forget who planted them. This home is yours. You bled for it. You broke your back for it. You kept me going when I wanted to give up. Do not let them take it just because you love them. Love is not surrender. And if anyone ever tries, go to Jacob. He'll know what to do. Love you forever. Roger. I held the letter in both hands. My breath caught. Jacob, our old friend, the lawyer who handled our will, retired now but sharp as a tack. Last I heard, he lived out near Anamosa. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my purse. Then I reached for the envelope Marla had mailed me in June. The one I hadn't opened out of spite. I tore it now. Inside were routine updates from the county assessor's office, a copy of the revised property listing, Lucas Hale and Lorraine Hale co-owners. It was there, in print. I looked up at the framed photo on the mantel. Roger in his uniform, me in my Sunday dress, hands linked, wind blowing hair across my cheeks. We were smiling, not because life was easy, but because we had earned it. They forged me, Roger, I whispered. And they think I'll just let them. I went to the hallway, pulled down the collapsible ladder to the attic. Dust clouded the air. I climbed slow. My knees groaned. There, under old quilts and Ethan's baby crib, was the filing box. Every tax return, every insurance form, every mortgage statement from 1987 onward. I dug like an archaeologist through my own life. I found the notary logs, the original power of attorney. I found witness statements from the tornado rebuild. I found the insurance claim Roger filed when he broke his hip in 2011. I started a pile. Paper by paper, I built a wall of truth. Not to attack, to protect. Downstairs, I made a list. I wrote out every inconsistency, every false date, every forged initial. I dated it. I signed it, with my real hand. And then I called directory assistants. Jacob Renner, please. Last listed in Jones County. The operator paused. Found him transferring now. The line rang twice. This is Jacob. His voice hadn't aged. I swallowed. Jacob, it's Lorraine, Roger's wife. A pause. Lorraine Hale. My goodness. I was just thinking about Roger last week. I closed my eyes, tears threatened. But I held firm. Jacob, I need your help. I used to wake up to the sound of birds. Now, it's the silence that wakes me. The kind that wraps around your bones before your eyes even open. A quiet so thick it presses against your chest. I reached for the phone that morning, hoping for a message. Just one. Even a forwarded joke, nothing. I texted Ethan thinking of you, sweetheart. Hope the pie was good. The message went green. Not blue. Blocked. Or worse, replaced. Maybe Ethan got a new phone. Maybe Marla got to it first. I dialed Lucas. Straight to voicemail. Again. I didn't leave a message. They never listened to them anyway. The voicemail box was just another digital drawer, where people filed what they didn't want to deal with. The air felt heavied, not cold, just uninhabited. I made coffee, I didn't want it. It tasted like burnt hopes. But the motion felt necessary. Spoon, mug, pour, stir. Like a ritual for a congregation of one. I sat by the window. The lake was still, not a single ripple. Then the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. My body forgot its age and moved fast. It was the mailman. He handed me a large envelope. No return address. Just my name in neat print, inside a typed letter. Lorraine, we understand this is hard for you. But we need space. We're asking that you not contact Ethan directly unless invited. He's adjusting to new boundaries, and constant communication disrupts that. We appreciate your understanding. Marla and Lucas, it was polite. Sanitized. Written like a corporate memo. I stared at the signature block. The lack of emotion. The weh? We appreciate your understanding. As if I were a stranger asking for too much. I folded the letter and placed it in the kitchen drawer. Top left, between the spare batteries and old pens. Then I pulled out a fresh notebook. It had a floral cover. I'd bought it 2 years ago, thinking I'd write recipes for Ethan. Instead, I wrote this November 26th. They are gone. Not dead. Just gone. I am not grieving. I am recording. I kept writing. They forged my name. They blocked my number. They took my home. They smiled through it. I am not crazy. I am not weak. I am not done. The pen felt steady in my hand. For the first time in weeks, my fingers didn't shake. I wrote until the sun slid past the pine trees and drew long lines across the floor. That evening, I made dinner for one. Baked potato, frozen peas, a leftover slice of pumpkin pie from Thanksgiving, now 5 days stale. I ate it all. I washed the dishes. I watched a rerun of Wheel of Fortune. I wrote again. November 27, I found the bank statements. There are charges I didn't approve. Lucas used the family card. That was meant for emergencies. Not spades. I attached a copy, stapled it. I was building a record, a timeline, something no one could refute, because silence can be twisted, but ink doesn't lie. The next morning, I found Ethan's name in the Suggested Friends tab on Facebook. I clicked message. Hi, sweetie. Miss you. Just wanted to say I'm here. Always. The message was sent. It was never read. 2 hours later, the account disappeared. Blocked again. I closed the laptop. My breath came shallow. This was a new kind of grief. Not mourning death, mourning relevance. I was not widowed this time. I was edited. I stood up, went to the hallway mirror, looked at my reflection. Same gray hair, same eyes. But something was different now. There was a firmness in my jaw. A squaring of the shoulders. They had erased me. But they had left the wrong woman standing. I reached into the drawer, pulled out the notebook again. November 28th, they underestimate me. They always did. And for the first time since that phone call, I smiled. It was Ethan's birthday picnic, not at the lake house. Marla's aunt had insisted on hosting this year a local park near Cedar Ridge with picnic tables and faded red swings. Neutral territory. My invitation came as a group text. Hi all, Ethan's turning 10 this Sunday. Picnic at Fairview Park, 3 p.m. Bring lawn chairs? No, I mom. No personal reach out. But it was a crack in the wall, and I took it. I wore my softest lavender cardigan. The one Ethan used to call Maga's Cloud. I packed the chess set we used to play with, and a box of his favorite oatmeal cookies. I baked them myself. Real butter? When I arrived, the park was already bustling. Balloons tied to tree trunks, a buffet table of chips and cupcakes. Ethan darted between cousins, his hair longer now, taller too. My heart clenched at how fast time moved without permission. "Lorraine," Marla said, noticing me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Happy birthday," I said gently to Ethan. He lit up. "Maga!" He started to run over. But Marla's hand gripped his shoulder. "Ethan," she said sweetly, "say hello. Then go finish your game." He looked up at her, confused. Then nodded and ran off. I stood there. Lucas appeared, holding a paper plate.
"Hey, Mom."
"Didn't expect you to come." "You invited me," I replied calmly. "Well, yeah, we didn't want you to feel left out." That word again. Want, not mean, not care. Want, I found an empty bench and sat down. No one joined me. I watched from the side as they passed around cake. No slice offered. No photo with Ethan. No mention of my cookies. Then came the group game trivia about Ethan's life. Marla read the questions aloud. "Okay, who knows Ethan's favorite bedtime story?" Someone shouted, "Harry Potter! Captain Underpants!" I raised my hand. "Stella Luna? The Bat story. I used to read it every night." Silence. Marla tilted her head. "Actually, that was years ago. His favorites have changed." A few people laughed nervously. I nodded. "Of course?" I felt the sting rise, but I pushed it down. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. They moved to gifts. I handed mine quietly to Ethan. "A watch." Roger's old one, polished, resized. He gasped. "Really?" Marla plucked it from his hands.
"Oh, wow."
"Very vintage, maybe not age-appropriate though, honey. Let's save it for when you're older." She tucked it into a gift bag and zipped it closed. My breath caught. That wasn't a watch. That was Roger. But I nodded again. Like furniture. The sun dipped. People packed up. Marla approached. "Thanks for coming, Lorraine. I know it's hard adjusting to new family rhythms." Her tone was honey and blade. I looked at her evenly. "Thank you for letting me witness the future," I said. She blinked. I turned and walked away. At the car, I pulled out my phone. I texted a number I hadn't in years. "Jacob Renner. Confirming appointment for Thursday, 10 a.m. He replied in minutes. "Confirmed. We'll be ready. Bring everything." I smiled. Marla had stolen the spotlight. But I still owned the stage. Jacob's office was tucked behind a dentist's building in Anamosa. A one-story structure with a slanted roof and cracked sidewalk. Nothing about it screamed strategy. But that's what made Jacob so good. He opened the door himself. "Lorraine," he said, pulling me in for a careful hug. "You look sharp." "Feeling sharper," I replied. He smiled. "Come in." The office hadn't changed since 2004. Same worn leather chairs. Same gumball machine half full. A photo of Jacob and Roger from their fishing trip hung behind the desk. I sat down and laid out the manila folder. Deed. Forged signature. Revised ownership listing. Property tax notice. Letter from Marla. Bank statements. Printouts. Copies. Jacob flipped slowly. "Himph?" His eyes scanned each line, pausing at the fake signature. "She's bold," he muttered. "She's sloppy." I corrected. He nodded. "True. But banks and county clerks don't always notice." He pulled out a pen and legal pad, jotting as he went. "She didn't include a notarized affidavit here," he said, pointing. "And this transfer form, it's outdated. They submitted a 2016 version in 2022. I blinked. "Does that matter?" "It does if we push it, especially with a forged signature." And he turned to another document. "This line here says no secondary power of attorney on file, but we filed one in 2019. I submitted it myself." He stood, moved to a file cabinet, and pulled out a labeled box. "Blew off dust. Roger asked me to hold something for you, in case something ever got strange." He opened the box. Inside, a sealed envelope. Jacob handed it to me. Lorraine opened with Jacob only. I opened it slowly. Inside, a power of revocation form. Roger had filled it out years ago, unsigned but dated. Alongside it, a typed letter. "Lorraine, if anything ever happens, I trust you'll know when it's time. Marla's clever. Luke is too passive. But you're granite. You bend, but you don't break. This letter gives you everything you need to reverse any shady attempt. Jacob will walk you through it. It's all there. Legal groundwork, fallback contacts, even the escrow records. I wish I could be there. But I know you'll protect what we built. With love, Roger." Tears welled, but I kept breathing. I'm not alone, I said. Jacob tapped the desk. You never were. We spent 3 hours combing through documents. Jacob scanned originals, filed a preliminary fraud report, and drafted a letter to the county clerk. This starts a paper trail, he said. Quietly. They won't know yet. Good. He handed me copies of everything. You'll want to store this somewhere safe. Not at home. I nodded. As we wrapped up, he leaned in. We also have the land grant from '93. Roger structured it under survivorship. Means you have automatic reversion rights. If we challenge now, they'll fold fast or risk court. That word landed with weight. Court. But also leverage. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I kept my hand steady on the wheel. My eyes scanning, my mind cataloging every next move. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't go inside. I walked down to the dock. The lake was calm, but a wind was stirring. I stood for a while. Then I whispered, "Let's begin." Back inside, I opened the notebook. December 2, they took what they thought was unattended. They forgot who I am. Now I remember. I called Ethan's school, asked about upcoming events, said I was updating family calendars. They gave me the dates. I circled one in red winter showcase, deck 18. Then I called a locksmith. Not for the house, for the P.O. box Roger used in town. I'd found the old key, still active, inside unopened statements. One addressed to Lorraine Hale, trustee. I brought the letter to Jacob the next day. He blinked in surprise. This changes the game, he said. Turns out, Roger had created a living trust in my name. Quietly. Fully funded. Listed assets, bank accounts, land parcels, insurance policies. All under my authority. They hadn't just overlooked me. They had no idea what I still held. Jacob leaned back. What do you want to do? He asked. I looked at the folder. The trust. The proof. I want to give them what they asked for. He raised an eyebrow. Silence, I said. But on my terms. The clock blinked 20:14 a.m. I was wide awake, not restless. Alive. I sat at the kitchen table, robe wrapped around me, pen in hand. The same notebook. But this time not grief, not injury. This was blueprint. December 3, Operation Day 1. I drew a circle, inside control, then branching out like spokes. The POA revoked, the bank account freeze, a title challenge filed, a trustee notification to county, the Ethan trust protection. I wasn't building revenge. I was resetting the balance. The truth is, they never asked me how I got through life. How Roger and I paid off the house while raising Lucas and caring for his ailing parents. How I knew the county clerk by name, knew which forms needed blue ink and which took black. How I always kept 2 sets of copies, one at home, one in the safety box. They assumed age meant forgetfulness, but age, real age, just means you've seen every trick before. I thought back. The first sign wasn't the fake signature. It was when Marla offered to organize the bills. I'd just come home from a minor fall. Nothing broken. Just bruised. She brought me soup in a folder. Let me simplify things for you, she said. We'll just put everything in one account. Less stress. I said no. Politely, a week later, Lucas asked again. It's not control, Mom. Just streamlining. I remember laughing back then. But they didn't laugh with me. They weren't simplifying. They were softening the lock. Now they were in. But they'd forgotten who built the vault. I flipped pages. Step 1, mail in POA revocation form. Signed. Certified. Notarized. Monday. Step 2, move primary funds to trust-only account. New location. Step 3, Jacob to alert county office. Challenge partial transfer on grounds of fraud and outdated documentation. Step 4, prepare Ethan trust protections. Education fund to be locked. I stared at the last item. Ethan. Still a boy. Still learning which voices to follow. Not his fault. But he deserved to know one day that I never disappeared. I just waited for the right hour. The heat clicked on. The pipes groaned. I made tea, chamomile, not for sleep. For ritual. I paced the living room. Stopped in front of the mantel. Roger's photo? I picked it up. I'm not doing this out of anger, I told him. I'm doing it because I still remember who I am. His eyes, frozen in that frame, seemed to smile. Back at the table, I took out the manila folder labeled Day 1. I added copies of the revocation forms, the deed, the trust documents Jacob gave me. Then I slipped in a new letter to whom it may concern. I, Lorraine Mendez, am the sole legal owner of the property at 721 Juniper Lane, as per the survivorship clause and trust established by Roger Mendez prior to his death. Any modifications to ownership made without my explicit notarized consent are invalid and will be pursued through formal legal channels. Attached trust certification, original deed copy, power of attorney revocation. Sincerely, Lorraine Mendez. I signed it, with the pen Roger gave me for our 25th anniversary. Gold nib. Still smooth. I placed it into a pre-addressed envelope for the county assessor. Then another envelope, to the bank manager. One I knew by name. Then I reached for my phone. I typed a message to myself. Final checklist, post office at 9, bank by 10, Jacob Tendron 30, safe deposit box 12. Lockbox moved to Emily's place by 3. I'd already spoken to Emily, my neighbor's granddaughter. College kid, reliable, sharp. She agreed to keep the box in her off-campus storage. No questions asked. Just in case. I turned off the lamp and watched the sun rise from the kitchen window. The lake shimmered, and I felt still, not victorious, not vengeful. Just certain. The kind of certainty that comes after you've been erased and decide to reappear on your own terms. Monday morning came with gray skies and dry wind. Perfect cover. I dressed in layers, nothing loud. A navy coat, dark jeans, gloves. At 8:58, I stood outside the post office. The doors opened. Inside, I sent 2 certified envelopes. The county assessor, title dispute, the regional bank POA revocation FUS trust certification signed. Stamped. Witnessed. Notarized 2 days ago at the pharmacy, of all places. Step 1 complete. By 9:45, I was at Sunridge First Bank. I requested Manager Davis. He came out smiling. Lorraine, been a while. Too long, I replied. He glanced at the papers. His smile dropped to professionalism. Good. I'll need to freeze all non-trust activity, I said. He nodded. Understood. Want to open a new security tier as well? Yes. Personal PIN. No voice authorization. He leaned in. Your son came in last month trying to access an old joint account. Claimed you'd authorized him. I kept my face neutral. That won't happen again? Step 2 locked. By 10:30, I met Jacob at the county office. He carried a briefcase and a manila envelope. Inside the survivorship deed, Roger's trust documents, the revocation filings. He submitted everything with the clerk, requesting confirmation receipts and case ID. It was all quiet. No headlines. No door slamming. But the axis shifted. By noon, I retrieved the lockbox. It held Roger's wedding band, backup ledgers, our marriage license. I moved it to Emily's off-campus storage, hidden beneath a bin of Halloween decorations. By 2 p.m., the day 1 folder was complete, filed, executed, distributed. I was no longer waiting to be saved. I was now the storm they didn't see forming. That evening, Marla scrolled her tablet, wine glass in hand. Lucas sat nearby, flipping through a pile of old mail he found in the storage bin she'd insisted on clearing. One envelope caught his eye. Unopened, to Lorraine Mendez. From Ethan Mendez Elementary PTA. He opened it. Hey, did you ever see this? He asked Marla. She barely looked. Probably junk. Lucas hesitated. It was a thank you letter. For volunteering. From last year, signed by the principal and Ethan's teacher. She was volunteering at school. Marla blinked. She must have done it to guilt us. Lucas looked down. The letter was warm, genuine. Did Ethan ever mention this? He was 6. They don't remember everything. Lucas placed the letter aside, but something itched. Ethan walked in. Dad, who's MAGA again? Lucas looked up. Your grandma? I saw a picture on your phone. Me and her at the zoo. Marla quickly interjected. Oh, that was ages ago, baby. Ethan paused. She looked happy. He left the room. Lucas stared at the letter again. No explosions. No confrontation. Just a quiet shift. That night I sat by the window. Not with tea. With ginger ale. Roger's favorite. I watched the pine shadows move. December 4th, they still think I'm dormant. That's good. Stillness is mistaken for surrender. But silence is planning's best friend. My phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. It read, just checking in. You okay? No name, but I knew the tone. Emily, I typed better than I've been in a long time. Then, tell no one I was here. She sent a thumbs up. And a heart. Somewhere, Ethan stared at a photo he couldn't remember being taken. Somewhere, Lucas reread a letter he thought didn't matter, and somewhere between memory and paper, I reappeared. It began with silence, not dramatic, not loud, just missing access. Marla woke to a declined transaction. Lucas found his keycard no longer worked at the bank. They each assumed a technical issue, a minor inconvenience. Then came the letter. Delivered by courier, heavy envelope, quality stock, no return address, just 3 words on the seal: you ask first. Inside, a formal notice from Jacob's office, legal letterhead, trust language. All access revoked, power of attorney nullified, ownership reverted. They weren't being kicked out, they were being reminded. This was never theirs to begin with. I scheduled the meeting at the lake house. Saturday, 4:00 p.m., Lucas texted, "What is this about? Why are you doing this?" I didn't reply. He wasn't ready for answers. Only reactions. At 30:57, I sat at the head of the old dining table. The one Roger and I bought on our 30th anniversary. It still held scratches from Ethan's toy trucks, and one faint ring from a wine glass Marla set down too hard one Thanksgiving. I wore dark gray. No jewelry, no makeup. My hair tied back, clean and simple. Like the truth. My notebook was closed. Pen placed beside it, 2 glasses of water on coasters, 1 folder in the center. The door creaked open. Marla entered first. She walked fast, her heels biting the floor. Her face was a hard mask, anger lacquered over fear. Lucas followed, more hesitant. His shoulders were pulled up, as if trying to shield himself from something unseen. Ethan wasn't with them. Good. Where is he? I asked calmly. With a neighbor, Lucas said. I nodded. Sit. They did. Slowly. Marla went first. This is outrageous. You've overstepped. We need to talk about this like adults. I met her gaze. This is me talking like an adult. Lucas shifted. Mom, come on. What's this all about? Why now? I looked at him long. Why now? Because you left me no room for later. I pushed the folder across the table. This contains copies of every document I've filed in the last 2 weeks. Revocation of power of attorney, title deed restoration, bank account restructuring, trust protection. All legal, all filed, all effective. Lucas, reach for it. Don't touch that unless you're prepared to respect what's inside. His hand froze mid-air. Marla scoffed. So what? You think this proves you're the victim?
No, I replied.
This proves I'm not the fool. Her eyes narrowed. We were protecting you. You were positioning me, I said. Lucas's voice cracked. We didn't mean to hurt you. I tilted my head. Then tell me what you meant when you blocked my number. When I sat alone on Christmas. When Ethan was told I'd moved away. No answer. Just breath. Short. Guilty. I was grieving. Lucas said finally. Dad had just died. We were trying to move on? And I was trying to hold us together. Marla leaned forward, her voice sharp. You're going to regret doing this to your family. I took a sip of water. I already did. That's why I'm fixing it? I walked to the kitchen and retrieved a second envelope. This one's smaller. Thicker? Lucas, I said, handing it to him. This is for Ethan. Inside is the educational trust your father set up. I've reinstated it. You have no access. He gets it when he turns 18. He deserves at least one thing untouched by your mistakes. His lips parted, but no words came. I thought you trusted me, he whispered. I did. Then you let someone else speak louder? He dropped his gaze. Marla stood, her chair scraped. You'll die alone? I nodded slowly. That may be true, but I won't die invisible. They turned to leave. Then I heard it. Wait, Ethan. He had slipped in unnoticed. Small feet, wide eyes. He held something in his hand, a photo. Him and me at the zoo. The one that used to sit on my dresser. Maga. I bent down. Hi, sweetheart. He walked to me and wrapped his arms around my waist. Marla's voice rose. Ethan, come here now. He didn't move. I held him for just a moment, the weight of him so light, but the meaning heavier than any ledger. Lucas looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 seconds. We should go, he said. Marla hesitated, then followed. No slamming doors, no parting shots, just absence. That night I made cocoa, 1 mug for me, 1 for Ethan. We sat on the porch swing. He leaned into my side, he asked, Will you come to my concert next week? I looked down. Wouldn't miss it. The lake shimmered. The sky held no stars, but I felt something shine anyway. Later, after he'd gone to sleep, I opened my notebook. December 6 justice isn't fury, it's form, it's fact. It's knowing they cannot erase you again. Not because they fear you, but because they're not allowed. I wrote one more line, underlined 3 times. Dignity doesn't raise its voice, it stands. Then I closed the notebook, and I rested. The day after the meeting, the lake was still, no wind, no ripples. Just a heavy stillness that clung to the surface like fog over forgotten words. I stood on the porch in my thick robe, a mug of coffee nestled between my hands. The steam curled into the cold morning air, and I watched it drift, here then gone. It reminded me of all the versions of myself I had shed. The mother who had stayed silent. The widow who had smiled politely. The grandmother who waited for invitations that never came. Today, I wasn't any of those women. I was simply me. Inside the house, every sound was sharper now. The click of the heater, the whisper of branches against the window, even the squeak of my slippers on the hardwood felt like punctuation after years of ellipses. I walked slowly through the rooms. Not out of weakness, but reverence. This was my house again. The walls still held the echoes of other people's voices, but they didn't dominate anymore. I reached for a photo box Marla had shoved into a closet. Dust powdered the lid like old regret. I opened it. Roger at the grill, apron askew. Ethan dressed as a dinosaur. A blurry shot of me and Lucas, laughing over something I could no longer remember. These weren't weapons. They were witnesses. I placed several frames back on the shelves. Not in defiance. Not to make a point. To remember I was part of this family, even if they chose to forget. Later that morning, I cleaned out the guest room closet. Folded towels, sorted linens. Found an old sweater of mine that still smelled like lavender. For a brief second, my knees buckled, not from pain. From the weight of how much I had let myself disappear. I sat on the bed and held that sweater to my chest. The soft knit scratched my chin, but I didn't let go. Not for a while. Just before noon, I checked the mailbox. One postcard. Mountains painted in soft strokes. Emily's handwriting looped gently across the back. Thinking of you. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. I didn't cry, but I did close my eyes and press the card to my lips. Inside, I placed it beside my journal. The drawer that once held Marla's instructions now held truth. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at the screen. It rang 3 times, then stopped. My heart beat faster, even though I didn't want it to. 2 hours later, a message arrived. Hi, Maga? Daddy said we can video? Are you busy, Ethan? I answered quickly. Never too busy for you, sweetheart. Moments later, his little face filled the screen. Cheeks pink, a tooth slightly crooked, hair messy in the way only children can pull off. Hey, love. He held up a paper. I drew us again. At the zoo. This time, I made the elephant bigger. I smiled. He already took up half the page last time. Ethan giggled. He's extra hungry now. He flipped the page. This one is the lake house. That's you on the swing. And that dot is me running. Looks like I'll need to run to catch up. He grinned. You're fast. You just don't know it. I swallowed hard. You're wise, you know that? He shrugged, then leaned closer to the screen. There's a concert at school. Art night. I want you to come. My breath caught. I'd be honored. Okay, I'll ask Dad again. I think he'll say yes. He glanced sideways, then whispered, Mommy was mad. But Daddy said it's okay now. I didn't respond right away. I looked into those eyes that looked a little like mine, and even more like Roger's. Thank you for telling me. He leaned close. I miss you every day. I miss you, too. More than you know. The call ended quietly. No goodbye, just a wave and a soft click. That night I made hot cocoa. 1 mug, then another just in case. I sat on the porch swing. The mug warmed my hands, but it was the memory of that little voice that warmed everything else. The lake was a mirror. A sheet of night reflecting back a version of me I finally recognized. No longer waiting, no longer erased, just living. Inside, I opened the journal. December 7th, I thought healing would be thunder. Turns out, it's a child's drawing. A swing creaking in the dark. A name spoken like it still matters. I let the pen rest. Not everything needs to be said to be understood. Some truths live between the lines. Some love arrives in crayons. Some victories are quiet but deep. I closed the book, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night. The snow melted slower that spring. Patches of white clung to the pine shadows around the lake house. But the sun came anyway, sure, steady, and soft. I didn't need permission to begin again. The front porch now held a new sign, the Lorraine Mendez Free Library. A coat of green paint, 2 benches, 3 shelves of books behind a glass door. Kids from the neighborhood came by in the afternoons, especially after school. Some took books. Others just sat on the steps and told stories. Ethan came every Friday. He helped me label the donations. He insisted we add stickers to the spines. Stars for adventure, hearts for kindness, suns for books with happy endings. I let him choose the system. People need to know how a story makes you feel before they open it, he said. He wasn't wrong. The house didn't feel empty anymore. Not because more people visited, but because I took up space again. I played music in the kitchen, sometimes jazz, sometimes old soul ballads that reminded me of road trips with Roger. I found myself humming as I folded laundry. I laughed, out loud, when I dropped a plate and it shattered. Just one plate, not the end of the world. I wasn't tiptoeing around my own life. One morning, I opened the drawer where I used to keep my journal. It was still there. Floral cover faded now. Edges curled. I hadn't written in weeks. Because I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. But that day, I picked up the pen again. April 3. Sometimes, healing isn't about fixing what broke. It's about living like you were never afraid to break again. I smiled, closed it, put the notebook back. On the porch swing, Ethan leaned into me. We watched the lake. Quiet.
Easy.
He held a book he'd picked from the little library, Charlotte's Web. I don't get why Charlotte had to die, he said. I looked at him. Some stories end love, but what matters is how they're remembered. He thought about that, then nodded.
I think you're like Charlotte,
he said. Oh, you helped people. Even if they didn't always know it. I kissed the top of his head. Somewhere in the trees, a bird began to sing. They tried to erase me, but I chose to stay. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I reclaimed my name, my house, my space in the story, not for revenge, but so that Ethan, and girls and boys like him, would know what quiet strength looks like. It looks like standing still when the wind tries to push you over. It looks like a woman with gray hair opening her doors. It looks like a free library, with a name on it that once belonged to a man who believed I could outlive grief. He was right. If this story reminded you of someone, your mother, your grandmother, yourself, share it. Leave a comment below. What would you do if someone tried to erase you? Because you're not alone, and your voice still matters.